Welcome to Sleepland. This channel is a place for slow stories and quiet moments. Nothing here needs your attention. You can simply listen, relax, and fall asleep. Tonight's story is about an ordinary day in the life of a court jester. A quiet life lived slowly. The court jester woke before the castle was fully awake. He did not move right away. He stayed still, listening to the quiet around him, letting the last pieces of sleep slowly fade. The room was small and simple. Stone walls held the cool air of the night, and the wooden bed creaked softly when he finally sat up. The floor beneath his feet was cold, but familiar. It had felt this way every morning for many years. He sat on the edge of the bed for a while. There was no reason to rush. No one expected him at a certain hour. His days began gently, without commands or bells. Nearby his clothes were laid out, a plain shirt, a dark vest worn smooth by time, simple trousers, folded the same way every evening. He dressed slowly, without thought, letting habit guide his hands. The jester's cap rested on a small stool. He looked at it, but did not take it yet. Some days required color and sound. Other days asked for quiet. This morning felt like the second kind. He walked to the narrow window and looked out into the inner courtyard. It was empty. Stone and wood rested in stillness. The castle always seemed larger and calmer at this hour. After a moment, he turned away and picked up his cap. The bells made a faint sound as he lifted it. He paused, then set it back down again. He would carry it with him later. The jester left his room and closed the door softly behind him. The corridor stretched ahead, long and quiet. Torches burned steadily along the walls. His footsteps were slow, almost silent. He had walked these paths so many times that he no longer counted the steps. This was how his days began, quietly, without ceremony. The jester moved through the corridors without any clear destination. He did not need one. Mornings in the castle were meant for slow walking, for letting time pass without purpose. The stone corridors curved gently, leading him past closed doors and tall arches. Most of the rooms were still quiet. The people who lived and worked in the castle would wake later, following their own routines. The jester knew these rhythms well. He had watched them repeat, day after day, year after year. As he walked, he lightly touched the wall with his fingertips. The stone was rough and cool. In some places it was smoother, worn down by countless hands before his. He often wondered how many people had walked these same corridors long before him, moving just as slowly, thinking just as little. A servant passed him quietly, carrying a bundle of linens. They nodded to each other without words. No greeting was needed. Everyone knew who the jester was, and everyone knew that mornings belonged to silence. The jester reached a narrow window, set deep into the wall. He stopped there, resting his hands on the stone ledge. Outside, the castle grounds stretched out, still and calm. Paths lay empty. Doors remained closed. Nothing asked for his attention. He stayed there longer than necessary. Time did not matter to him. His role in the castle was not measured in hours. Eventually, he continued walking. His steps echoed softly, then faded. He passed by the great hall, its tall doors closed for now. Inside, long tables waited for voices and movement. The jester knew that later in the day, this space might fill with sound, or it might not. Either way, he would adapt. He paused near the entrance to the hall, listening. Nothing stirred. The jester adjusted the belt around his vest, a small, familiar gesture. His clothes were not bright anymore. The colors had softened over time, just like the castle itself. He preferred it this way. Brightness was tiring. Quiet lasted longer. He continued toward the kitchens, not because he was hungry, but because the kitchens were always awake before the rest of the castle. Warmth lived there. Soft voices, repeated movements. As he walked, he thought about the day ahead. Not in detail, only in feeling. There might be a request for him to perform. There might be none at all. Both possibilities felt the same. The jester's life was made of these moments in between. Moments where nothing happened. Moments where he simply existed, moving slowly through stone and shadow. And as the castle woke around him, he remained calm, unhurried, and quietly present. Just another part of its daily life. The jester reached the kitchens without any sense of arrival. He simply found himself there, standing near the doorway, as he often did. The kitchens were already alive, though in a quiet, orderly way. There was no rush yet, only steady movement. Warm air wrapped around him as soon as he stepped inside. The smell of bread, herbs, and slowly heating pots filled the space. It was a comforting smell, one that never changed much from day to day. The jester breathed it in and felt his shoulders relax. Cooks and kitchen servants moved about their tasks. They chopped vegetables, stirred thick mixtures, carried baskets from one table to another. Their movements were practiced and calm. No one looked surprised to see the jester. He had been coming here in the mornings for as long as anyone could remember. He leaned against the wall, staying out of the way. That was where he felt most comfortable, present, but not needed. One of the cooks nodded at him. The jester nodded back. No words followed. None were required. He watched as dough was pressed and folded on a wooden table. The repeated motion was slow and even. Press, fold, turn. The sound of hands against dough was soft, almost rhythmic. The jester found himself watching longer than he intended, his thoughts drifting without direction. A pot began to simmer gently. Someone adjusted the fire beneath it. Everything in the kitchen followed an unspoken order. The jester sat down on a low stool near the wall. It had been placed there long ago, and no one ever moved it. He rested his hands on his knees and simply observed. He was not a guest here, and not a worker either. He existed somewhere in between. Sometimes a cook would speak to him, a simple remark about the day, a quiet complaint about sore hands or tired feet. The jester would listen, offering a small smile, perhaps a short reply. He did not try to be funny. The kitchens did not need laughter, they needed calm. After a while, a piece of bread was placed near him. No announcement, no explanation. He accepted it with a small nod and ate slowly, one bite at a time. He did not think about performing. He did not think about his role. In the kitchen, he was simply another person passing through the morning. Time moved gently here, measured not by bells or commands, but by the slow progress of preparation. Eventually, the jester stood up. He thanked no one in particular and received no response. That was how things were done. He stepped back into the corridor, leaving warmth behind him. The stone walls greeted him again, cool and familiar. The castle continued to wake. and the jester continued to move with it, unhurried, unnoticed, and at ease. After leaving the kitchens, the jester did not choose a direction right away. He stood in the corridor for a moment as if listening to the castle decide for him. This was something he often did. The castle usually led him where he needed to be. He began walking again, slowly, letting his steps fall where they wished. The corridor opened into another, then another. Stone arches passed above him. The air changed slightly from place to place, cooler near the outer walls, warmer closer to the inner rooms. The jester stopped near a long bench set against the wall. It was old, worn smooth by years of use. He sat down carefully, adjusting his vest, and rested his hands in his lap. This was one of his usual places. He had spent many hours here, doing nothing in particular. Waiting was an important part of his life. He waited more than he performed. He waited more than he spoke. Sometimes someone would pass by, a servant carrying supplies, a guard changing position, a noble moving quietly from one room to another. Most of them barely noticed him. Those who did offered a brief nod, nothing more. The jester did not mind. He had learned long ago that being unnoticed could be comfortable. As he waited, his thoughts moved slowly. He did not think about the past in detail, nor did he imagine the future. His mind rested in simple observations: the sound of footsteps, the soft crackle of torches, the faint echo of voices somewhere far away. He adjusted his position on the bench, feeling the cool stone behind him. His clothes felt familiar against his skin. He had worn them so many times that they no longer felt like something separate from him. The jester noticed how the light changed as time passed. Torches were replaced. Sunlight shifted through distant windows. Shadows moved across the floor in long, quiet shapes. He followed them with his eyes, without effort. No one called for him, and that was fine. On some days, his presence was required. On others, it was not. He had learned to accept both with the same calm. After a long while, he stood again. His joint protested softly, then settled. He took a breath and continued on his way. He passed a small alcove where cleaning tools were stored. He passed a staircase that led upward, then another that led down. He chose neither. There was no reason to. The jester walked until he reached a window overlooking the courtyard. He rested his forearms on the stone and looked out. A few people had begun to move below, crossing the space slowly. Nothing urgent, nothing loud. He watched them for some time. He felt no desire to join them. The castle felt steady, unchanging, and within it, the jester felt the same. This was his life between performances. Quiet, simple, filled with waiting that asked nothing from him. After standing by the window for some time, the jester turned away and continued walking. His steps were unhurried. He did not feel pulled in any particular direction, but his body seemed to remember where to go. As he moved through the corridors, he began to encounter more people. The castle was no longer asleep. It was awake in its quiet way. A young servant approached him, holding a folded piece of cloth. She slowed when she saw the jester and stopped beside him. "Could you take this to the east wing?" she asked softly. The jester nodded. He did not ask questions. He took the cloth and held it carefully, as if it were something fragile. On his way back, he noticed a group of children from a noble family sitting on the floor near a window. They were quiet, occupied with a simple game of stones and lines drawn on the floor. One of them looked up and smiled at him. The jester smiled back. He did not perform. He did not speak. His presence alone seemed to please them. He lingered for a moment, leaning against the wall, watching them play. Their laughter was soft and brief, quickly settling back into concentration. After a while, he moved on. The jester passed by a mirror mounted in a dark frame. He slowed and looked at his reflection. The face that looked back at him was familiar, lined with time, calm in expression. He adjusted his vest slightly, then continued walking. By midday, the castle felt full, but not crowded. Life moved through it in predictable paths. Everyone had a role. Everyone followed it. The jester returned to the central corridors and found a place to sit. He folded his hands and waited again. This too was part of his work. Being available. Being seen when needed and unseen when not. The hours passed gently, and the jester remained exactly where he belonged. As the day moved toward midday, the castle settled into a slower rhythm. The busiest hours of the morning had passed, and the quieter stretch before evening began. The jester remained seated for a long time. He didn't count on how long. He only noticed the way his body grew heavier, more relaxed, as if it were becoming part of the stone bench beneath him. Nearby, voices passed and faded. Footsteps echoed briefly, then disappeared. Doors opened, then closed again. Each sound had its place. Eventually, the jester stood and stretched slowly, feeling the familiar pull in his back and shoulders. He welcomed it. It reminded him that time was moving, even if it did so gently. He walked toward a small side room where sunlight often reached the floor. The window there was wider than most, and the light rested warmly against the stone. He stood in it for a while, letting the brightness touch his hands and face. He thought about nothing in particular. Hunger came quietly, not sharp or demanding, just a mild reminder. When he felt it, he made his way back toward the kitchens. This time, he did not stay long. A simple bowl was set before him. He ate slowly, pausing between bites, listening to the soft sounds of work around him. No one spoke to him, and he did not mind. After eating, he thanked the cook with a small nod and left. The corridors felt different now, warmer, filled with a faint scent of food and smoke. He wandered again, choosing paths without thinking, up a short staircase, down another, through a passage that led nowhere important. At one point, he found himself near the practice yard. He paused at the doorway, watching quietly as guards moved through slow, repeated drills. The sound of metal was dull and measured, never sharp. He watched until his attention drifted. When he turned away, the afternoon was already beginning to soften. The castle felt calm, complete. The jester returned to the inner corridors and took his place against the wall once more. This was the heart of his day. Not performance, not laughter, just being there, present, unnoticed, and perfectly at ease. As the afternoon stretched on, the light in the castle began to change. Shadows grew longer, resting along the floors and walls. The jester noticed this without thinking about it, the way one notices breathing. He walked slowly through the corridors, passing places he knew well. A narrow passage that always felt cooler than the rest. a stair with one uneven step near the top, a door that never closed properly. These small details grounded him. They made the castle feel lived in, and made his place within it feel certain. In a quiet corner, he stopped near a shelf where old objects were stored. Nothing of great value. Spare candles, broken tools, things that no longer had a clear purpose. He picked up a piece of string, turning it slowly between his fingers, then set it back where it belonged. Not everything needed to be used. A servant passed by and paused. "The hall may need you later," she said softly. The jester nodded. He did not ask when. He did not ask why. He continued on his way, holding the thought lightly. Later could mean many things, or nothing at all. He took a seat on a low step near a window that looked toward the outer walls. From here, he could see the sky shifting in color, moving toward evening. He rested his arms on his knees and allowed himself to sit without purpose. This was one of his favorite parts of the day. The time when the castle seemed to exhale. Sounds softened. Movements slowed. Voices became fewer. The jester closed his eyes for a moment, not to sleep, just to rest. When he opened them again, the light had dimmed slightly. A torch nearby had been lit, its flame steady and calm. He stood and brushed dust from his clothes, a habitual gesture. Then he began moving toward the great hall, unhurried, prepared for whatever might or might not be asked of him. He adjusted his vest, then reached for his cap. He did not put it on yet. He simply carried it in his hand. The bells remained silent. The evening was approaching, and the jester was ready, in the quiet way he always was. The great hall was already prepared when the jester arrived. Candles had been placed along the walls, their flames steady and warm. The long tables stood in their usual rows, clean and orderly, waiting. The jester paused at the entrance. He did not step inside right away. He stood there for a moment, taking in the space. The hall always felt different at this hour. Not empty, but not full either. A place between moments. He walked in slowly, his footsteps soft against the stone floor. Each step echoed faintly, then disappeared. The sound never lasted long in a room this large. No one asked him to perform. Not yet. He moved along the side of the hall, staying close to the wall. This was where he usually stood when nothing was required of him. He leaned lightly against the stone, holding his cap at his side. Servants moved quietly, setting out dishes, adjusting candles, straightening benches. Their work was nearly finished. They spoke little, and when they did, their voices were low. The jester watched without focus. His eyes followed movement, then rested. He felt no need to be entertaining. This was not that kind of moment. Eventually, a noble passed by and gave him a brief look. Nothing more. No command followed. The jester shifted his weight and waited. Time passed in small, gentle pieces. A candle burned lower. A door opened, then closed. Someone crossed the hall and disappeared again. The jester thought about how many evenings he had spent like this. Standing, waiting, listening. He did not grow restless. Restlessness belonged to people who expected something. When the hall began to fill slightly, he remained where he was, present but not central, visible but not important. This too was part of his role, to soften the silence simply by being there. And so he stood, breathing slowly as the evening settled into place around him. As the hall grew more settled, a quiet signal reached the jester. It was not spoken aloud. A glance, a small movement of the hand, that was enough. He stepped away from the wall and moved toward the center of the hall. His pace did not change. There was no need to hurry. He placed the cap on his head. The bells made a soft sound, barely noticeable. It was enough. The jester did not perform loudly. He did not tell stories that demanded laughter. Instead, he moved slowly between the tables, making small gestures, offering brief smiles, quiet expressions, a raised eyebrow, a gentle bow, a pause that lingered just long enough. Some noticed, some did not. That was how it was meant to be. A child laughed softly. An adult smiled without thinking. Then attention drifted elsewhere. The jester did not mind. His purpose was not to be remembered. After a short while, the signal came again. It was time to stop. He stepped back toward the wall and removed his cap. The bells fell silent once more. He felt no pride. He felt no disappointment. It had been enough. As the hall continued its quiet evening, the jester returned to stillness. His role was complete, at least for now. He leaned against a stone and listened to the soft blend of voices and movement. Everything flowed without effort. The night was approaching, and with it, the slow end of the day. As time passed, the great hall began to empty. Voices faded one by one. Chairs were pushed back. Footsteps moved away and did not return. The jester remained where he was. He did not leave with the first wave of people. He never did. The end of gatherings was always slower for him. Servants collected dishes and wiped the tables. The sound of cloth against wood was soft and repetitive. Candles burned lower, their light growing warmer and dimmer. The jester watched without focus. His thoughts were calm, loose, unconnected. Eventually, the hall became almost empty. Only a few servants remained, finishing their tasks. The jester stepped away from the wall and began walking slowly across the floor. His footsteps echoed more clearly now. The hall felt larger when it was quiet. He walked between the tables, tracing familiar paths. He had walked them many times after many evenings like this one. There was comfort in the repetition. When he reached the far end of the hall, he paused and looked back. The space felt settled, complete. He left the hall and entered the corridor beyond. The air there was cooler and the light softer. The castle at night was different. Not asleep yet, but close. The jester moved through it calmly, no longer expecting to be needed. His duties for the day were finished. Only rest remained. The corridors were nearly empty as the jester walked back toward his room. Torches burned lower now, the light softer, less certain. Shadows rested quietly along the walls. His steps were slower than before. Not from tiredness alone, but from habit. Nights in the castle were meant for gentle movement. He passed familiar doors, all closed. The castle was settling into itself. When he reached his room, he paused before entering. He rested his hand against the door for a moment, feeling the cool wood beneath his palm. Inside, the room was just as he had left it. Small, simple, calm. He removed his vest and folded it carefully. Then his shirt. Each movement was deliberate and unhurried. The jester placed his cap on the stool. The bells did not sound. He sat on the bed and allowed himself to breathe deeply. The day was over. It had been an ordinary day, and that was enough. He lay down, pulling the thin blanket around him. The stone walls held their quiet. The castle breathed slowly around him. Soon the jester closed his eyes, and the castle, piece by piece, followed.